All right, what we're going to do right now is hop into a video about coming out of your shell. And I think this is a topic that really applies to everybody, and we all go through this in varying degrees. But it really applies in the dating world because, if you don't feel comfortable sitting across the table from, somebody that you're meeting for the first time, or even in a relationship, sometimes we have a hard time relaxing. You're not going to get the same result as if you were completely yourself, completely relaxed, putting your best foot forward. And so, when I think about it, we all experience varying degrees of this kind of issue. So, like a couple funny details about me. Like, I'm the kind of person that I don't really slob around the house. I'm so in sweats and a t-shirt right now, but typically, if I hop out of the shower, I'll put deodorant on. I'll do my hair. I really don't have a moment in time where I look unkept. About the worst I do is maybe just not shave for a day or two or something. And usually, even when I'm in that, when I'm in stubble mode, I'll shave my neck and stuff like that, right? And so the reason I bring that up is because I kind of got into the habit of that. I mean, I've always kind of been like that a little bit, but I got into the habit of that when I was with my ex-girlfriend. And because I never really fully relaxed around her all the way. I was always kind of almost in that shell of worrying about where I stood with her, and that's not a good place to be. And I think that it's good to take a look at what we're doing in our lives to try to figure out to what degree are we in our shells. But despite all that, it's funny because when I look at my life, I've really come a long way in terms of that. So as a kid, I went to Catholic school, private school, and was raised heavily in the religion. Very scared to voice my true feelings on anything that went against sort of what I was socially conditioned to believe, and that carried over into my life, right? So in my dating life. When it came to women, I'd be very afraid to express sexual attraction or that sort of aggressive masculine man to woman communication style. That made me uneasy, so that was a shell. In my work, and I think a lot of people go through this. I think this is common. That's why I'm talking about it. So in my work, for the longest time. So, okay, keep in mind. So I ran my own business for a long time. And then, I had 4 kids and then ultimately ended up taking a corporate job. So I'm in my late 20s, took a corporate job and, just had this sense of okay, there's who I am, personally, in my own personal life. And then there's who I have to be at work. It's this shell of a person, this professional, sterile fucking attitude, the guy with the tight collar and the tie on, and you got to be that guy, and you just can't be yourself. And I remember hating myself, going to work. It's God, I don't even feel like a real person. And I remember I hated about myself, but I felt the pressure because I had 4 kids, and had my stay-at-home wife at home at the time. And I just felt the pressure of having to go and fill this role and be this certain way. But, in actuality, nobody tells us to be like that. It's just fear that we have, right? Your boss never actually sits you down and says, look, don't tell that joke. Don't kind of go off script and be yourself for a minute. Or just only be the fucking, face in the suit. Nobody actually says that stuff, right? So a lot of this stuff, the shell and the sort of the hindrance of our true personality, it's just fears it's just operating off fears that we have, right? And it takes guts to go off script and to just be the actual fucking person that we are. And so I think at work was one of the biggest ways I came out of my shell. So I was had 4 kids at home, had the stay-at-home wife, all the pressure and the bills on me, etc. And I remember feeling like I had to be this guy. And about the time that I started to just say fuck it, I'm going to live life for me, and I'm going to do things my way. So about the time that I sort of left religion behind, about the time that I started training jiu-jitsu, I also decided like, hey, like, yeah, there's pressure on me to perform at work, but guess what? I can still be myself and I can still do a good job. Now, I might not be the guy that they're going to kick all the way up the corporate ladder, and I'm okay with that. But what I stopped doing was going to work wearing a tie. So I stopped wearing it. Now, keep in mind, at work, my job at the time was to go in and meet with hospitals. And so I'd be meeting with like C-suite level hospital directors and people higher up in major hospitals to provide them the service that my company provides. And so I'm sitting down in formal meetings and lost the tie. I still am wearing a button-up shirt, still have slacks on, but I go down a couple buttons on my shirt. I lost the robotic speech, and I just started being myself. And part of what came with that is I started leaving the earrings in, and I'd wear the bracelets and stuff like that to work. And that was the way that I decided to relax into myself, despite, the requirements of, it's like I wasn't wearing shorts to work. I wasn't like, wearing a t-shirt to work. But I brought my personality to work with me. And that was a scary thing for me to do because I had my wife and kids at home, and I had obligations, and I worked in a formal setting. Now, keep in mind, nobody in that setting is doing that, right? So I'm a vendor. I am a lower down in the totem pole, right? It's not like I'm in the hospital administration myself. So typically, as a vendor, you want to please your customer, right? And so there is that pressure that's on me. And then you look around the environment, everybody else is all tight in the tie and the sports jacket on and that kind of a thing. And so it was a very uncomfortable thing for me to do. I went through a series of decisions in my life where, like when I decided to get out of the church, I lost a lot of family and friends, or at least the sort of tight relationship by doing that. And when I decided to get a divorce, a lot of that kind of stuff came along too. And then just deciding to be myself at work was like a huge decision for me, which made me congruent in all aspects of my life. So before I ever did, now keep in mind at the time I was married. Okay, so it didn't really have that correlation at that time. But being myself at work now, or not now because I'm in a relationship, but like in my previous phase where I was single and dating, it made my life to where I was super fucking congruent between work, being at home, being out on a date. I'm just myself all the way across the board. So you can't overstate the value of that. And so coming out of your shell is like this super fucking important thing for dating. It's like you should be the same person across the fucking board. Now, I'll just be honest. Like one area that I've noticed that is harder for me is my own personal challenge. Okay, so in like big groups. So I'm not typically the kind of person that tries to like capture all the attention in a big group setting and try to carry the fucking crowd. So I like to be myself, and I like to I like to assert myself. I like to get my way. I like to lead things in my own little way. I like to do what I want. I like to be alpha in that regard, but I don't like to be the guy that tries to like seize the crowd and control the crowd and do that thing, right? So typically when I get in like a group setting, my personality tends to take somewhat of like a middle seat in that sense, unless I'm in a weird mood that night, or maybe the group they're centered around some activity that I'm leading or something like that. Okay, then in that case, that's different, right? But another thing is like, okay, I train MMA, so I'm in a gym full of dudes that are tough dudes, aggressive dudes, guys that it's a hard crowd, right? And so typically in a situation like that, like, I'd like to say that that my personality shines through all the time, but sometimes I get overwhelmed by the social setting, and I think this happens to us a lot too. And so, like as I noticed that about myself, I feel like, to create this idea of total congruence across the board is not necessarily 100% accurate, right? So if you're looking at your own life and you're saying, God, like I've come out of my shell, but not necessarily all the fucking way. Well, I don't know if it's really possible in my life. I'm not the shit in all moments. Like there's things that affect me. There's things that that trigger my insecurities. There's things that tend to shut down my personality in some cases, you know. And there's some areas that I shine, you know. And I think that's going to be different for everybody. And so you don't want to create this expectation where it's like you're just going to be the shit all the time. Now, some people can do that, okay? I think I did a video on this before where I think take Kevin Gates. He's one of these people. So he's a celebrity, right? He's rich. He's got money. Doesn't have to give a fuck. His you know, he sings like really crass rap. And so, you know, take somebody like that where they're making money just being themselves, writing real lyrics, doing their own, you know. Now, it took him being himself to get where he's at, but now he's at where he's at. He doesn't have to give a fuck, right? So he can walk around town like in a drunken like stupor, like just not giving a fuck. And probably for somebody like him, it's going to be a lot more easier to get congruent. Now, the question is, now when I say congruent, I mean being yourself all the time, right? And the question is, did it take him being congruent to even get to where he's at? And my guess would probably be like, yeah. But now that he's at where he's at, it's a lot easier for him to just, you know, not give a fuck across the board, right? So I think it's interesting, you know. So what I'm saying is there are people out there like that, where no matter what situation they're in, maybe it's a new group of people, you know, maybe it's a new work setting or whatever, they're just on all the time. You know, I think that exists, but I think it's a very hard to achieve thing. So I think that, you know, me saying, hey, try to come out of your shell, you know, take the steps that are uncomfortable but necessary in your life to create this congruence. It sounds like it's creating this expectation for you to be perfect, and I don't think that's realistic. I think it's hard work to get to that place. Some people are there, and maybe the work that they've done to create that in their lives is just like at a higher level than maybe where I'm at right now, right? But I've had this lifestyle change in my life. I've had this sort of relaxation and ease come into my life that if you look at where I was at a couple years ago or a handful of years ago and what it felt like inside to live in my body at that time versus now, my life is virtually stress-free, and I'm not straining to be somebody that I'm not. I think everybody goes through this, but it's in varying degrees, right? Like not everybody is going to go into a major hospital with earrings and a fucking, you know, couple buttons down on their shirt and talk to the CEO like they would their neighbor, right? So I'd like to think that, you know, I'm somewhat qualified to talk on this topic, but I can say that, you know, if I get in front of a crowd of a few thousand people and try to give a motivational speech, you know, I'm probably going to be a little bit shell-shocked too. So I think there's levels to this shit, right? And so I think it's worth it though. So at the end of the day, you know, if you're out dating or even in your relationship, like I said, so my last relationship, I didn't fully relax all the way. I felt the need to like be kept at all times because I really, I think there was an insecurity there, like me versus my ex-girlfriend. So in a relationship, it's important to try to come out of your shell. And then if you're dating, right, that's hugely important because you're going to be sitting across the table from people that want to know who you are. What is it like to be with you? And you don't want to present an inaccurate picture. We all try to scale it back a little bit or like hide the bad things or whatever, but it's like, despite like not showing your red flags right away, you still want to present an accurate depiction of who you actually are, you know, and because you want to get that from them too. And so it's really important to be able to do that. And the more relaxed you are, the more that a date for you is just the same as going to work or talking to your fucking neighbor. That is the vibe that you want to come off with on a date. So congruence, super important thing. Progressively step up your efforts in being yourself, no matter what the consequences are, right? So at work, you could get fired if somebody doesn't like you potentially, right? On a date, girl might not like you or a guy might not like you. If you ventured out, you tell the funny joke and then it bombed, right? But you got to risk it. And the rewards are really just like a stress-free life, a congruent life, like an attitude that people are attracted to. And what's funny, and I'll end on this note. So what's funny is that I recently did like a lateral move in my company, and by the way, my aspiration is to coach full time, but I still have a full time job, and so I did this lateral move in my company, and funny enough, I interviewed in this like not a indifferent way, but I just let my full personality shine. At the end of the day, I really didn't care too much whether or not I got the job or not. And a lot of people interviewed for this job, and my personality is what actually got my boss to hire me for this position. So now I get to work 100% from home. It's before I was on the road and all this stuff. And what's funny is that these little micro risks that you take in showing your personality out in the world, it seems so scary when you do it, but when you actually do it, there's actual rewards for it, because some people are going to vibe with who you actually are, and they're going to choose you for that, just the same as some people are going to deny you for who you are, because as you do this, you'll get the negative reaction too. But it's worth it. So we'll close out on that. Hope everybody has a great week, great upcoming weekend, and we'll talk to you later.